Videotape that I'm making for Polyspan covering. It's an educational tape, hopefully, and hopefully you guys can use it. I just want to say right from the start that it's not a professional tape. All I'm doing is trying to show you different methods of using Polyspan, which is an excellent covering material. So what I have to say is, again, it's not professional, so I don't want to hear any criticism from you guys, okay? Thanks a lot. First of all, there are several different ways of covering different types of airplanes. This is a fuselage for a quarter Wakefield, okay? And what I've done is pre-dope the surface around the perimeter with nitrate dope and 2 coats sanded between on the perimeter. Then apply the Polyspan by laying it over the surface and dope through it with either thinner or thin cleared dope right around the perimeter. And you do it all the way around, overlap the edges, and you'll see about the overlapping later on in the tape, the best way to do that with a monocoque trim iron. And then after that's on, I take an iron and shrink it, just again like you'll see further on in the tape. And after it's shrunk, then I just put 2 coats of nitrate clear on it. The trim on this particular airplane, because I want to keep it super light, is just Japanese tissue, which is doped on with thinner. Actually, you just put thinner over it, nitrate thinner. And then after that thinner dries, what I do is just coat it again with 1 more coat of nitrate dope on the whole fuselage, and it's finished. And the strength you get out of this is so far superior to Japanese tissue, and the rigidity, and weight-wise it's relatively insignificant. This fuselage was originally covered with Japanese tissue, and because I had so many holes in it, particularly when the prop folded over here and things like that, I decided let me put the Polyspan on. The difference in the weight was a ½ a gram heavier when I put the Polyspan on, which I think we'll all agree is relatively insignificant. So for the strength to weight ratio, you get out of this, it's fantastic. Here is a Smith Mulvihill fuselage, again a SAM type airplane. Same method, except spray the color on with the mixture that I'll tell you about later on in the tape with the aniline dye, and then a coat of clear on the top of that sprayed on, and again the same structural rigidity. This is a wing from a 52-inch Stratostreak. I've covered the whole airplane with the Polyspan, and basically I didn't do any dyeing on this. What I've done is put 7 coats of butyrate dope on this, and then masked it off and painted butyrate black on here to get the trim. The tips are covered with Japanese tissue, and butyrate will work for this just the way nitrate will, and it'll give you a fuel-proof finish if you need fuel-proof, unless you're going to use high nitro, which we'll go on later about the K&B Super Epoxy finish. But the strength is just phenomenal, particularly on the Stratostreak wing, where the original design didn't have spars on the top. The strength that you're going to get out of this for rigidity, you can see. You can't even twist it. It's just absolutely incredible. I'm going to cover this Marvell wing. This is the new double geodetic. And I got Bill Kimball here and Bob Geyer, and they're going to be watching me do this thing here, Marvin. So there they are. There's Bill Kimball, and there's Bobby Geyer. And he's getting ready to build one of these things too after he finds out if mine's going to work. But we're going to cover with Polyspan. Now I've already done one section here, and what I've done is I've pre-doped the underside with 3 coats of heavy nitrate dope, and including the spar, and then I just dope. Well, you'll see what I'm going to do, because we'll do the next section, and Bill Kimball will attempt to take good videotapes, and if it doesn't come out good, you can blame him.
Thanks so much.
And I'll leave his phone number so you can really call him and break his horns, okay? So that's what we're going to do. Okay, we'll start. All right, what we're doing now is we already cut the Polyspan out, and we're just going to overlap the center rib. And because it's undercambered, even if it wasn't undercambered, what I like to do is we'll start on the straightest portion of the wing, which in this case is the spar, which runs straight down all the way from the root to the tip. And we're going to start doping through that, and we'll tack it. Okay, and then rub it through until it's a little sticky, and then we know we can pull from the other end and it's not going to move. That's good. Okay, now we're going to come down this end, and generally this stuff, if you just let it lay flat, it's going to be pretty straight. If you try moving it like this or this, you'll notice a wrinkle develop here. So what you have to do is when you pull it down here, make sure there's no wrinkles developing here. Now there's a little one there, but that's probably because this section is doped here right now and it's not doped over at this end here. But we'll tack it down here at this end next. Okay. And just rub our finger this way to try to pull any excess material out. Okay, now what we'll do is we'll just work this all the way down to this tip. Just a thin amount of dope to cover this spar. Make sure it's enough on there to cover the spar, and I'll dope between two rib sections here at a time. And then run it down towards the tip. Keep working towards the tip on this spar. All right. This nitrate dope is thinned about 70% right now for this operation.
And this picture would be a lot better if you were right-handed.
Is that right?
Yeah, because your arm is coming right into the viewer's into the viewer's living room.
They get the idea.
Oh well.
And what you can do is just stop it when it's redundant, you know, like going to the tip. I don't know if you have to see the whole thing.
Well, you've got such lovely tips.
Oh, thanks.
Okay.
Nobody's ever told me that before. I'm getting emotional, Bob.
I can see that.
Take it easy, guys.
Easy, easy. Okay, I'll do this center rib here. I'm going to do it from the spar forward, right up to the edge of the leading edge, including the leading edge. And always rub it through, particularly on under camber, because then you know it's going to stick and you're loosening up the dope underneath. Now we're going to grab the trailing edge, pull the excess out, and dope that rib all the way down. Make sure you get enough dope on it, and then rub that through. Well, I do such good work, I scare myself here and pull diagonally this way, much like you do a monocoat job, and tack this, making sure there's no excess either way. We'll get as much wrinkle out as you can. Dope that down. Okay, now I'm going to come to this corner and do the same thing in this corner. And you do the same on this corner now. Just tack it here. I might add that when I finished this particular panel, I then, with the nitrate, pre-doped this center rib where it's going to overlap for this piece that I'm working on, and the center rib here so that there's nitrate dope on top of it too. This helps make this panel stick to the other panel. Okay, it's like pre-doping the polyspan. Now we come and do this last section here. Now what I don't like to have so much overlap on the trailing edge, so I'm going to cut that off. Where did I put my scissors?
So you're more or less cutting it flush with the edge of the rib.
Well, I'm going to want a little overlap there, but I don't want too much. Don't need it, because what I've done for strength here, on all my polyhedral joints, leading and trailing edges, I have 3/4 ounce glass cloth, thin C8 in place, about 1 inch long. So there's plenty of strength there. Try to make sure that there's no excess along this rib. That's really important, because to try and get it out later is a pain in the neck. And when you pre-dope this wood with 3 heavy coats as I did, even though you'll use thinner if you wanted to lift it up, it's a little more difficult, so you want to try and get it as tight as possible, and it looks pretty good right now. Okay, now I got that corner done. Now I'm going to work each rib from the center. I'm going to work out. going to do is we're going to do this rib here, and this rib here, and then we'll do the tips. We'll show you what to do with tips. We can stop now. Yeah, one thing that I want to mention, that there is a definite grain to this polyspan, and you always want to run the grain span-wise for obvious reasons. You can tell if you have a scrap piece which way the grain runs, because you try to rip it in one direction, the grain, it will rip much easier with the grain. If you try it against the grain, it won't rip, and you always want to run the grain span-wise. Usually the grain, well, in fact not usually, every roll I've ever opened, the grain runs the length of the roll, okay? Also, there's a glossy side and a semi-glossy side. There's a little tag on the new rolls of polyspan that says glossy side, or this side out, and semi-gloss. Make sure that the glossy side is out, because if it's not, it's going to be much more difficult to get a smooth finish. Okay, now we're going to do the tip here, and comes up, I'll show you what we'll do with that. But first I'm going to dope the tip down. We'll let this get hot in the meantime. And you'll see how that works in a minute. First we're going to dope this tip rib down. And you'll notice there's a little excess of polyspan here, which is left there purposely. And what we'll do is actually we'll roll that over. Now I've pre-doped the outside of this poly rib so that I can roll this over and it'll stick to it. Okay, now we'll take a nice double-edged razor blade and just slit this here and here and here. Okay. Let this dry a little bit more, still a little wet. And we've got to wait for the iron to get hot now, so we'll roll it over later. Every single rib on the undercamber. In fact, it's not a bad idea on a wing where you want super strength in the covering to do the top of the wing and the bottom of the wing. In this case here, I'm only going to do the bottom because there's enough structure in here, I think, to hold this thing together without having to do the top also. And doping through, when you do the top and the bottom anyway, will tend to adhere it. Being that there's undercamber on it, we're going to rub it through. So we'll do every geodetic rib. And this adds a huge amount of strength to the structure. Make sure there's enough dope on the brush so that it's wet when you're rubbing it through, so you're sure it's sticking down, and you'll have no problems with the undercamber popping off. That's good for now, Bill.
And here we go.
Now it's important on this trailing edge to get right up to the front of the trailing edge because of this undercamber. Keep that airfoil true. You don't want the polyspan or any cover material you're going to use to pull off the leading edge of the trailing edge. It sounds a little confusing, but that's the correct description of what we're talking about. And one thing about this polyspan, if you do pre-dope it properly as far as the surface is concerned, once you stick it, it's on there. The chance of it coming up is almost impossible. Now, a little tip that Sal Frusciano, who imports this stuff, told me about, because I was having trouble rolling the edges over like you normally do with silk or Jap tissue or silk span and everything else, and he says, take a monocoat iron and just crease the edge and it'll help do it. And he is correct. There's no question that works better. And I've even gone a little further. First, I'll take it and try to get it creased more than 45 degrees with the flat part of this monocoat trim iron. Okay, then I'll dope it through. And remember, this edge of this rib that I'm doping to now with this rollover edge has been pre-doped, and that's important, otherwise you'll really have a hard job making it stiff. Now, because of these geodetic ribs, it's difficult to get right up to the corner of the rib. And gently, I have a razor blade here, here we go, single edge razor blade. And this works great for the corners. Just grab that and get it into the corner, press it up. Okay, and then just keep rubbing until it's tacky, very tacky. Not totally dry, but very tacky. And right now it's very tacky. While it's still a little tacky, you take the trim iron and hold it square to the side of the rib and just keep pushing that polyspan down. We've got a little buildup on the bottom of this. I will get that off later. That's not coming off of there. That's on there until you make a kit out of it and ready for a rebuild job. Okay, the same procedure as we did with the monocoat iron there, we're going to do the same with the leading and trailing edge. We're going to start a little curve here to help this thing go around the radius. And also on the trailing edge, we're going to crease that like we did with the tip rib. Keep working it back and forth until you get the thing almost 90 degrees. In fact, as close to 90 degrees as possible. Okay. Now we're going to dope the leading and trailing edge down. Just running a little dope around the edge. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're going to take a good sharp single edge razor, a double edge rather, razor blade, and just hold it on the angle here, and just run along, leaving enough that it'll start going up to the front or the top part of the leading edge. And you notice how easy this polyspan cuts with the razor blade. It does work very easily. The top, the bottom, okay. And actually, I missed it a little bit here, so I'll just cut it with the scissors. It's not really critical because it's not going to mean anything. When you overlap this, you won't see it anyway. Now I'll just take that and cut it flush with the top. Stuff's got static electricity, doesn't want to leave me. All you do is lay the razor blade right on the trailing edge, and you cut it flush. Actually got a lot of dope on here now and I can feel it drag. And when you do the top, you're just going to cut it off flush with the trailing edge so that all the surfaces are covered and there's actually no rolling over on the trailing edge, but everything is covered and that works fine. Just doping this leading edge roll over here. See, it's coming up. You may not see it on camera. It's coming up here a little bit, but we'll show you how we get rid of that. That's no problem. Just finish doping it all the way down to one end first. Make sure there's dope on it though. Sometimes you think it's on there. It's better to have a little bit too much than not enough, because your fingers are going to rub off any excess or rub it into the wood. In any case, it's not going to hurt anything. Okay, now as I said, it's coming up over here a little bit. So we just dope it again. Rub it with our finger until it's tacky. And usually it sticks it down, but just to be sure, you take the trim iron. I'll see it's popping up again. Take the trim iron and go over it. And you will get that down to where you won't even see the seam. See, it disappeared now. Chances are it won't come up. If it does, you just do the procedure again. But that's about all you got to worry about on the rolled over edges. Basically, you've seen the whole procedure. You do the tips the same way. What I'm going to do is pre-dope this section here. This section I pre-doped before, so that when I hear the tip, that's going to work. And you just keep rolling the edges over the same method we did here, and you do the top the same way. Make sure you do all the geodetic ribs and everything else. And after it's all doped the way we just showed you, doping all the ribs, and you get the top done, then take your monocoat iron and take the iron and shrink out any loose pieces that are on here, any wrinkles. Just go over the whole thing and get it tight totally before you pre-dope it or you start doping it. The dope itself will shrink it, but I like to use the iron because then it's easier to go over the whole thing and get the dope evenly on it. And my procedure will be then to put 4 coats or 5 coats, depending upon the gloss that I want, 4 or 5 coats of nitrate dope thinned out about 50%. And I use a foam brush, which I'll show you what that looks like. It's very close cells on it. Can you get a good shot of that, Bill? It says Polybrush, not for shellac or lacquer, USA. It's a wooden handle. But those brushes work good. I use this on silk and everything else when I do a dope job, no matter what I use. And you just dip it in a brush and just go back over it. In fact, we'll give a demonstration when we're ready to dope that. But these are the kind of brushes to use. Okay, now that we've got the whole wing covered, we're going to shrink it with the regular monocoat iron, and I've got it set for about 320 degrees, which is a good temperature to do this, okay? And just going to take the iron and go back and forth like this, nice and slowly. Go once, back and forth, and go to the next section. Back and forth. Keep working that down. And while you're doing this, you don't want to put any twist into the wing by pressing it down or something, because you'll wind up ironing that twist in. When you get finished with this side, then you flip it over and do the top the same way. Shot of it, it's the Polybrush, and it says not for shellac or lacquer, USA. A very close-celled brush, foam brush, which works real well for this. These are glass jars that I use for thinner and clear dope, and other materials also. You can get them in Kmart's or Walmart's, and they're excellent for putting these materials in. As you can see, the cap has got a plastic liner on it, and that plastic liner does a good job of sealing it. It's made by Anchor Hocking, and really does the job very well. Also, Libby makes this square one, same type of setup. I use one of these for cleaning engines, put engine cleaner in and clean parts of engines. It works real well for that too. Okay, we're going to start doping this wing. Actually, I've already doped the underneath, so what you're going to be seeing is the top part. We'll be doing the top of the wing next. and I'm using Randolph or SIG, I use both, nitrate dope thinned about 50%. And I dip the brush just up to the edge of the wedge here, and with quick strokes, nice light touch, just dope it like that. Just make sure it's covered, and don't be afraid to put dope on. Just make sure you just brush lightly and it won't go through the covering, it will just adhere to the surface, which is what you want it to do. Any dope that goes through, and here's a piece of hair, any dope that goes through is just adding weight, and you really don't want to do that. So wind up putting 4 or 5 coats of dope. I think I mentioned that before. And then we'll wait 5 days. In the meantime, we'll puncture holes in the bottom of the wing with a pin, so that each one of these bays have holes, so each one of these bays can breathe. So after I finish doping those 4 or 5 coats, we want this thing to air out and everything else before we put the K&B Super Epoxy on. Otherwise, it's liable to take the Super Epoxy and loosen up the covering, and it may never tighten up again. So you want to be sure that you don't do that. The best way to do is just let it cure for a week. And the pinholes, of course, also help, as I mentioned before. A little tip about the brushes. When you're finished with a coat of dope, take one of these Ziploc bags and put the foam brush inside the Ziploc bag. And it'll make it last a long time. You can use it for at least one full airplane for the most part. Just put it in the bag, and that's it. And the next day it'll be just about the same as when you left it. And when you dip it into the dope, it'll soften any dope that has dried a little bit on it, and the brushes last a long time that way. Okay, we just finished spraying the wing with the aniline dye mix 16 to 1, 16 parts thinner to 1 part of aniline dye, in this case orange. And the next thing we'll do after this dries, we'll wind up putting pinholes in the bottom, okay? And I'll show you how we do that. Okay, we're going to put the pinholes in the bottom. What we want to do is make sure that each one of these bays here get air to it so that they all dry out from the inside. This way we'll have no problem when we wait 5 to 7 days to put the K&B Super Epoxy on, that we're going to wind up having this completely dry inside and outside. So what I do is just make sure that each bay has a hole in it, you know. So put a pinhole. Now that covers that 4 bays. Now we got this bay here and this bay here. Now that covers that whole section. Now we go to this one, put a pinhole here, and that covers this whole section. Then we'll wind up doing 2, 3, 4 here, and continue on till the whole wing is done. Out, and also makes it cure much quicker. Actually, this wing was sprayed about 2 hours ago, and as you can see, I can run my hand on here, and it's perfectly cured at this point, to the point where you can handle it and everything else. I used a Badger 400 touch-up gun for my spraying, and it works real well. It's got the aluminum cup and everything else. I keep a second cup here with thinner on it, so as soon as I'm finished spraying the first coat, I put the thinner cup on the touch-up gun and spray the thinner through it to clear the epoxy out. I also use this respirator when I spray so that I don't inhale all those bad things that are bad for you. I have a through-the-wall fan here that actually I keep going every time I do some spraying in here to get the mists and the chemicals out of here. Also, here's another item that's of value. Find these in a drugstore. It's what they call Easy Dose. It's like a little plastic syringe that goes up to 1 teaspoon, and it's great for mixing and measuring out the, not mixing, but measuring out the epoxy. These spoon droppers are available at the drugstore. Usually any decent drugstore should have these. We're now going to get ready to spray the K&B Super Epoxy on the top of the wing. And that'll complete the wing. We'll let it cure for several days and it'll harden up real good and it'll do a complete job of fuel proofing it, which is what I'm really after. I'll be running 55% nitro through this and with a Nelson 19 or Nelson 21, and I want to be sure that it is totally fuel proof. And with this K&B Super Epoxy you can pour the fuel right on and it's just going to run off, so it really works very well. The next thing we'll be doing is probably taking some test flights to see how this wing's going to work out on the Marvell. Other than that, that's it. There's another method that I've tried here, which basically is the method that Sal Frusciano, who imports the Polyspan, tells you about. And what I've done is I've mixed 1/4 ounce aniline dye with 8 ounces of nitrate thinner with 0.8 of an ounce of nitrate clear dope, and mixed that up and sprayed it on. And you can see I masked off the yellow, or actually it was the white, so that I could get the yellow stripe there and make the center sections yellow and the white tips for better visibility. This happens to be 160% T-bird. And the reason I did that is I wanted to see how it was going to come out. And I previously put 2 coats of clear dope nitrate on it first, and that was the base. And after I put the yellow dye on with the dope mixed into it, then I took some nitrate black and trimmed it off and put the black trim on. And I quite frankly like this method even better because it seems to spray more evenly than just using the aniline dye with the thinner. So you may want to try that. Also, there is some tape that I use that works real well, and let me show you what that looks like. Yeah, this tape is called Flex Mask, and it's made by Corroden Hobby Products. They make 2 different sizes, and I've been using this on my models for years. They make a 1/4 inch wide and an 1/8 of an inch wide. Now the 1/8 of an inch you can really go around compound curves, and even the 1/4 inch goes around pretty good curves too. What's nice about this, it's a low tack, and once you put it on you don't even have to pre-dope the surfaces to keep it from going under. It does a great job. And my method is, after I mask it off and paint it, immediately after I paint it I peel the tape off while the dope is still wet, and this leaves almost no ridge at all. Then I spray clear dope over the colored dope that I put on to seal that, and then brush 1 more coat of clear on top of that, and it gives me a nice finish. On this particular model now, it's ready for the K&B Super Epoxy, and it's been 5 days since I've done the last doping on this with the nitrate, so it's ready to go now. So basically that's it. Some of these hard to get items, I do some selling of some of these products which are difficult to come by, and this is the paid commercial part of this film here. And if anybody wants to give me a call, ask me any questions about it, they're welcome to do that. There's my name and address and fax number and phone number. And here's some of the products that I handle. And usually I have almost all of them, if not all of them, in stock. I stock the Texas timers for the free flighters, and the Polyspan, and some other things too, basically, that are too numerous to list. Silk. So if you need any of these, give me a call and I'll be able to help you out. We'd be glad to do that. I hope you enjoyed it, tape, and have a nice looking model. This is the K&B Super Epoxy yarn here. When you patch it, there's a little different method that you would normally use because of the K&B Super Epoxy. The first thing you do is you cut out the hole, or the rip or the tear, whatever you have, with a sharp, I use a Brano X-Acto number 11 blade. You can see how it's been cut out of here. The next step is to take the nitrate clear, because we use the nitrate base, and if you use a butyrate base you use butyrate dope. Take nitrate clear and you brush it around the perimeter. What you're doing is pre-doping on top of the K&B Super Epoxy with the nitrate dope. And believe it or not, if you don't do that, it's going to be difficult for it to stick. Now the next thing you do is you cut out the Polyspan to the size with about an 1/8 of an inch overlap of the actual damaged area, making sure that the shiny side of the Polyspan is out. Okay? Now we're going to dope this in place. Okay, in the usual method, making sure we get all the wrinkles out, or as much as possible. Now, of course, I've tacked that there. I'm going to let that set up a little bit. Okay, that's pretty dry. Now tack it in this corner here. Now we'll run it down here. Always rub away to try to pull the excess material out, so you have very little to shrink with the iron. It's much better to do it that way. I'm going to let that dry, and then we're going to shrink it with the monocoat iron. We use the trim iron for that also, which is the easiest way to do it. Okay, now we're going to take the monocoat trim iron and we're going to shrink this tight. I'm just going on the actual inside of the patch to tighten it up. I don't want to go near the edges where I just doped because the heat could loosen it up. Okay, that's nice and tight now. Now we'll get ready to put a couple of coats of clear dope on it, and then I'll make a mixture of the spray again with the color and spray the color on, and then it'll be just pretty well finished. And if I want to fuel proof it, I'll put K&B Super Epoxy over it. Probably wind up with 4 coats of nitrate, the same as what the base was, and then K&B Super Epoxy, and that takes care of the patch. For small little holes, you might want to take a paper punch and punch some of these out and just put the patch on or the polyspan with that. But very simple to do. The main thing you got to remember is pre-dope around the perimeter so that the nitrate will stick to the nitrate. Otherwise, you'll have a problem with putting. Okay, now we've put the dope on here, the nitrate dope. And then we've sprayed it. After we had about 4 coats on, we sprayed it with the dye the same way we would do the whole finish. And then after that cured for a few days, then I put K&B Super Epoxy over it, and you can see the patch is all complete and looks very much like the original. Actually, I just sprayed a little more orange on than I should, so the color is a little bit darker, but hey, when you patch an airplane, that's what happens.